A call sign is never just a word. To anyone outside that world, it might sound like a nickname pulled out of thin air, something convenient for radio chatter. But inside, it carries weight. It carries memory. It carries the sum of moments where things could have gone wrong but didn't, and moments where they did. A call sign is given, not chosen, and once it sticks, it becomes part of who you are in ways that are hard to explain to anyone who hasn't lived under that pressure. Every call sign starts somewhere. Sometimes it comes from a mistake made early on, something small that turned into a running joke. Other times, it comes from a single decision made in seconds, when hesitation would have cost lives. Either way, it follows you. It shows up on mission boards, in briefings, in late-night conversations when the lights are low and the stories get quieter. You hear it spoken over radios in places where names feel too personal and too dangerous to use. Over time, that word begins to hold faces, voices, losses. It holds the sound of rotor blades overhead, the feel of dust in your mouth, the split second where everything goes silent before action breaks loose. A call sign becomes shorthand for trust. When you hear it, you know who's on the other end. You know how they move, how they think, whether they'll push forward or pull back. You know if they'll be there when things go sideways. That's why hearing it outside that world hits differently. It's not supposed to exist beyond those tight circles. It's not meant for casual conversation or innocent recognition. It belongs to a space defined by secrecy and sacrifice. So when a child says it out loud, when that word passes through a voice that hasn't known combat or command structures or classified briefings, it creates friction. Two worlds touch for a moment, and neither is prepared for it. For those who carry call signs, the weight isn't just professional. It's personal. That word has been spoken in moments of fear and relief. It's been yelled across chaos and whispered over radios when silence mattered more than sound. It's been attached to decisions that still replay years later, the kind you revisit when sleep won't come. The call sign becomes a container for all of that. You don't talk about it much because you don't have to. Everyone around you already knows what it means. But the weight grows heavier when you realize that call sign doesn't stay contained. It travels home with you, even if you never say it out loud. It sits in the way you carry yourself, in the pauses before you answer certain questions, in the things you never fully explain. Families feel it without always knowing its name. They sense when a word holds history, when a glance means more than it should, when silence isn't empty but full. For a child to recognize a call sign is to reveal that the wall between those worlds was never complete. Somewhere, that word crossed a threshold. Maybe it was overheard in a hushed phone call, or written on a piece of paper that was never meant to be seen. Maybe it was spoken once, casually, in a moment of exhaustion, without realizing it would stick. Children have a way of absorbing what adults think they've hidden. The weight, then, isn't just about the missions or the rank or the danger. It's about responsibility. A call sign represents a role someone steps into, again and again, knowing the risks and accepting them. When a child knows that word, it becomes a reminder that those risks ripple outward, that what happens under night skies and coded language doesn't stay there. It shapes households, routines, and the quiet understanding that some questions don't get answered. That's why the room froze. Not because the call sign was secret, but because it was recognized. Recognition gives weight a new dimension. It confirms that the identity forged in extreme conditions has meaning beyond the team. It means that the strength associated with that call sign has been witnessed from the outside, even if only in fragments. It means the person behind it was never just a silhouette moving through classified spaces, but also someone deeply connected to a life that runs parallel to that world. In that moment, the call sign stopped being a tool and became a bridge. It carried not just authority or experience, but relationship. It reminded everyone present that these words, these labels, are tied to human beings who are seen, remembered, and claimed by someone small enough to whisper, but strong enough to be heard. Innocence has a way of moving through spaces it was never designed to enter. It doesn't ask permission. It doesn't follow protocol. It simply shows up, carrying honesty that hasn't yet learned to filter itself. When innocence meets sacrifice, The contrast is sharp enough to make people uncomfortable. One side is built on protection, discipline, and restraint. The other is built on trust, curiosity, and an unshaken belief that the world can still make sense. The men in that room lived in a reality shaped by preparation and consequence. Their days were structured around risk assessments and contingencies. Every movement had a reason. Every word had to matter. They were trained to control fear, to compartmentalize loss, to keep emotion from interfering with execution. Innocence didn't belong there. And yet, there it was, standing quietly, unarmored, untrained, and completely unaware of how much weight the air around it carried. A child does not understand sacrifice the way adults do. Not in terms of classified operations or long deployments or names etched into memorials. But children understand absence. They understand promises delayed. They understand when someone leaves and comes back different, quieter, more distant. Innocence notices patterns long before it understands causes. It fills in the gaps with its own logic, often more perceptive than adults expect. When that child spoke, she didn't do it with reverence or fear. She spoke from recognition. That alone unsettled the room. Recognition means observation. It means she had been listening, watching, piecing together fragments of a life that existed partly in shadow. While the adults around her worked hard to shield her, she was learning anyway. Innocence does not mean ignorance. It means seeing without the burden of context, and sometimes that makes the truth sharper. Hidden sacrifice thrives in silence. It depends on being unseen. Many who serve prefer it that way. They don't want applause or explanations. They carry what they carry because they believe it's necessary, not because they expect to be understood. Families are often pulled into that silence by default. They learn which questions not to ask. They learn how to read moods instead of reports. Over time, silence becomes a shared language. But innocence does not speak that language fluently. It hears the pauses. It notices the way conversations stop when it enters the room. It sees the tension behind smiles and the exhaustion that lingers even on good days. A child might not know the details, but she knows when something matters. She knows when a word carries power. She knows when a name or a call sign isn't just a label, but a piece of a story adults are protecting. When innocence meets hidden sacrifice, it doesn't judge it. It doesn't categorize it as noble or tragic. It simply acknowledges it. That acknowledgement is what makes it powerful. Adults spend years learning how to look away, how to bury discomfort, how to keep functioning despite what they've seen. Innocence looks straight at it, unblinking, and names it without realizing that naming it breaks a rule. The discomfort in that moment wasn't about exposure. It was about reflection. The men were confronted with a version of their reality stripped of armor and language. No acronyms. No mission briefs. Just a child connecting a call sign to a person she loved. In that connection, the sacrifice became personal in a way it rarely is for those who carry it daily. It was no longer abstract or compartmentalized. It had a face that hadn't learned to hide emotion yet. There is a quiet courage in innocence. Not the kind celebrated in stories of bravery, but the kind that comes from speaking truth without understanding the cost of doing so. That courage doesn't calculate consequences. It simply responds to what feels real. In a world where sacrifice is often masked by professionalism and silence, that kind of courage can feel disruptive, even dangerous. Yet it is also grounding. It reminds those who serve why they carry what they carry. Not for recognition, but for the chance that innocence can exist at all. For the possibility that a child can grow up safe enough to speak freely, even if that freedom momentarily unsettles the adults who work to protect it. In that brief collision between innocence and hidden sacrifice, something fragile and honest surfaced. Something that couldn't be unspoken once it had been heard. Silence is often misunderstood as emptiness, but in certain moments it becomes the most active presence in the room. It settles in not because there is nothing to say, but because everything that could be said arrives at once. When the words stopped, the silence did not rush to be filled. It held. It pressed in on everyone standing there, forcing attention in a way noise never could. For people trained to move, to respond, to act, silence can feel unnatural. These are individuals conditioned to break stillness, to replace it with direction and momentum. Orders flow. Updates follow. Even waiting is filled with purpose. But this silence was different. It wasn't tactical. It wasn't intentional. It arrived on its own, triggered by recognition rather than command. Recognition changes the shape of silence. It turns it from a pause into a mirror. In that moment, each person present was confronted with something they had not prepared for. Not a threat, not a variable, but a truth surfacing unexpectedly. Recognition strips away layers of role and rank. It reaches past training and lands somewhere more exposed. The absence of speech created space for memory. Faces appeared in that stillness, some living, some long gone. The mind moved faster than the room, replaying moments tied to a single word. Silence allowed those memories to surface without interruption. No one needed to explain what they were seeing because the recognition was shared. The stillness confirmed it. Silence also communicates respect. Without anyone deciding it, the room collectively acknowledged the weight of what had just been spoken. No one rushed to correct or redirect. No one laughed it off or minimized it. The lack of reaction was itself a response. It said that this moment deserved to exist as it was, unedited and unresolved. In high-stakes environments, recognition usually comes through formal channels. A nod from a superior, a citation, a quiet handshake after a job well done. Those forms of acknowledgement are structured and controlled. This was neither. It was raw and unfiltered, delivered by someone with no awareness of hierarchy. That made it harder to manage and impossible to dismiss. Silence stretched because no script applied. There was no protocol for responding to recognition that came without expectation. Speaking too quickly would have flattened it. Turning away would have felt dishonest. Silence became the only appropriate response because it allowed the moment to breathe, even if breathing felt uncomfortable. Within that quiet, roles blurred. The men were no longer just operators. The child was no longer just an observer. Everyone stood on equal ground, bound by a shared understanding that something meaningful had occurred. Silence leveled the space. It removed authority and replaced it with presence. Recognition also carries responsibility. To be seen is to be held accountable, not just for actions, but for the meaning attached to them. That responsibility settled in the silence. It asked unspoken questions. What does it mean to be known? What does it change when your identity extends beyond your control? Silence allowed those questions to exist without demanding immediate answers. There is a reason people often remember silent moments more clearly than loud ones. Noise blurs details. Silence sharpens them. In that stillness, every small movement became noticeable. A breath held too long. A shift of weight. A glance exchanged. These details anchored the moment in memory, ensuring it would not fade into the background of routine interactions. Silence also protects what words might damage. Any attempt to explain or soften the recognition would have reduced its impact. Words could have turned it into a story or a lesson. Silence preserved its authenticity. It kept the moment intact, exactly as it occurred, without interpretation. For those present, the silence marked a transition. Before it, the call sign existed within a defined context. After it, that context expanded. Recognition altered the boundaries of identity. Silence served as the threshold between those two states, a brief pause where the old understanding gave way to something broader and more complicated. In that room, silence was not passive. It acted as acknowledgement, reflection, and restraint all at once. It allowed the weight of recognition to settle without being diluted. It honored the speaker without turning her into a symbol. It gave everyone time to absorb what had changed, even if no one could yet articulate how or why. Service is often measured by uniforms, deployments, and the visible markers of commitment, but its cost rarely stays confined to the person who wears the insignia. It moves quietly into homes, routines, and relationships, reshaping them in ways that don't always announce themselves. Families learn this early, sometimes without realizing when the lesson began. The cost arrives gradually, blending into daily life until it feels normal. The unseen cost of service often starts with absence. Not just physical absence, but emotional distance that lingers even when someone is present. Long stretches of time apart teach families how to function independently. Children learn which milestones might be missed and which questions shouldn't be asked. Partners learn how to carry decisions alone, how to manage worry without spreading it further. These adjustments happen quietly, without ceremony, but they accumulate. Uncertainty becomes a constant companion. Schedules shift without explanation. Plans are made with the understanding that they might be canceled. Goodbyes are intentionally understated, because making them heavy would make leaving harder. Families learn to live in a state of partial information, knowing enough to be concerned, but not enough to fully understand what's happening. That uncertainty creates a background tension that never fully disappears. Silence is another cost, and it settles deeply. Service often demands discretion, and discretion extends beyond the job. Stories remain untold. Experiences are referenced vaguely or not at all. Over time, family members learn how to listen between the lines, how to interpret tone and posture instead of words. They become fluent in what isn't said. That fluency can bring closeness, but it can also create distance, especially when silence replaces connection. Children feel this in unique ways. They may not grasp the details, but they sense the gravity. They notice when a parent carries the weight of something invisible. They notice the moments when conversations stop abruptly or when emotions surface unexpectedly. Children adapt by filling in gaps with their own understanding, often taking on responsibility earlier than they should. They learn resilience before they learn why it's necessary. Partners shoulder a different kind of burden. They become the anchor, the constant presence that keeps life moving forward. They manage households, finances, and emotional stability, often while suppressing their own fear. Their strength is assumed rather than acknowledged. Support systems exist, but they don't always reach the quieter struggles, the late nights spent alone with worry, the effort it takes to appear steady when uncertainty feels overwhelming. The cost also shows up in reintegration. Returning home does not mean returning to who someone was before. Service changes people, sometimes in subtle ways, sometimes in ways that are impossible to ignore. Families must learn each other again, renegotiating roles and expectations. This process can be disorienting. The person who left is not exactly the person who came back, and everyone has to adjust without clear guidance. These adjustments require patience and empathy, yet they are rarely framed as part of service. The focus remains on the individual in uniform, while the family's labor remains invisible. Their sacrifices are not logged or rewarded. They do not receive call signs or medals, but their contribution is woven into every outcome. Without their support, service would not be sustainable. The unseen cost also includes pride mixed with fear. Families hold pride in what their loved one does, even when they don't fully understand it. That pride coexists with anxiety, creating a complex emotional landscape. They learn how to celebrate quietly and worry privately. Public recognition can feel both affirming and unsettling, a reminder of risks they would rather not dwell on. Over time, these costs shape identity. Families become part of a community defined by shared experience, even if those experiences differ in detail. They develop their own language, their own ways of coping. Strength becomes habitual, not heroic. It is expressed in routines maintained, support offered, and resilience practiced daily. When a child speaks a call sign, when a moment of recognition pierces the usual boundaries, it briefly exposes this hidden network of sacrifice. It reminds everyone present that service is never an individual endeavor. It extends into living rooms, school days, and whispered conversations at night. The cost may be unseen, but it is deeply felt, carried by those who stand just outside the spotlight. Holding the weight so others can continue forward. Legacy is often imagined as something deliberate, carefully shaped, and intentionally passed down. In reality, it moves quietly, formed through habits, tone, and the things people think no one is watching. It is not always taught. More often, it is absorbed. Words matter less than patterns. Children learn who someone is by how they move through the world, how they respond to pressure, how they carry responsibility when no one is asking them to perform. In families shaped by service, legacy is rarely explained outright. There are few speeches about duty or sacrifice. Instead, legacy shows up in small, consistent behaviors. The way a parent double-checks locks. The way they sit with their back to the wall in public places. The way they pause before answering certain questions. These actions seem ordinary, but they carry meaning. Over time, they become familiar, even comforting. Children pick up on these details without realizing they are learning something significant. They notice how strength is expressed without raising one's voice. They see how fear is managed rather than eliminated. They observe discipline that isn't harsh, but steady. These observations form a blueprint, not of what to do, but of how to be. Legacy, in this sense, is not about instruction. It is about example. Silence plays a large role in what gets passed on. When stories aren't told, children don't assume there are none. They sense boundaries and respect them instinctively. They learn that some things matter too much to be spoken casually. This teaches discernment. It teaches that not every truth needs an audience. That understanding becomes part of their internal compass, guiding how they handle their own experiences later in life. Legacy without words also includes values demonstrated under stress. How someone treats others when tired or frustrated leaves a lasting impression. How they respond to mistakes, whether with accountability or deflection, becomes a lesson. Children internalize these responses, storing them for moments when they face similar pressure. The legacy is not the event itself, but the response to it. In the context of service, legacy often includes a relationship with responsibility. Children see that obligations are honored even when inconvenient. They see commitments upheld without complaint. This doesn't mean they always agree with the demands placed on their family, but they understand that responsibility is not optional. It is something you carry because others depend on it. That understanding shapes how they view their own promises. There is also a legacy of restraint. Knowing when not to speak, when not to react, when to hold emotion in check. These lessons are rarely articulated, yet they are powerful. Children learn that control is a form of strength, not suppression. They learn that composure can coexist with care. This balance becomes part of how they navigate conflict and uncertainty. At the same time, legacy is not limited to toughness. Compassion is passed down just as quietly. Children watch how service members care for their teammates, how loyalty extends beyond convenience. They see empathy expressed through action rather than words. Helping without seeking recognition. Showing up consistently. These behaviors teach that strength and kindness are not opposites, but partners. When a child recognizes a call sign, it reveals how deeply this unspoken legacy has taken root. That recognition did not come from a lesson or a briefing. It came from observation and connection. It shows that identity has been transmitted not through explanation, but through presence. The child did not need to understand the full scope of what that call sign meant to recognize its importance. Legacy passed without words is resilient because it is internalized rather than memorized. It does not rely on stories being retold accurately. It lives in instincts and reactions. It surfaces in moments of decision, when there is no time to think through principles. In those moments, people act according to what they have absorbed, not what they have been told. This kind of legacy is difficult to measure, but its impact is enduring. It shapes how the next generation approaches challenge, responsibility, and identity. It ensures that values survive even when circumstances change. Without speeches or instruction, something essential is carried forward, quietly shaping futures through what was lived rather than what was said. Strength is often defined by visibility. Loud actions, physical power, decisive commands delivered without hesitation. In many environments, especially those shaped by conflict and high stakes, strength is something you project outward. It is meant to be seen, to command space, to leave no doubt. But moments that disrupt this definition can reveal a different kind of strength, one that does not rely on dominance or volume. A child's voice rarely carries authority in adult spaces. It is often overlooked or gently redirected. Yet when a child speaks from a place of truth, That voice can cut through layers of conditioning. It doesn't challenge with force. It simply exists, unprotected and sincere. That sincerity has its own power, one that can stop movement, silence conversation, and shift attention without demanding it. Redefining strength begins when those who are trained to embody it are forced to recognize it in an unexpected form. The men in that room were accustomed to assessing threats and capabilities. They understood strength as preparation, endurance, and control. A whisper from a child did not fit any of those categories, yet it carried enough weight to halt them. That contradiction required reassessment. There is strength in awareness. The child's recognition showed attentiveness, connection, and understanding that extended beyond her years. She had noticed patterns, absorbed information, and drawn conclusions without guidance. This kind of awareness is not accidental. It reflects emotional intelligence and presence. It demonstrates an ability to see beyond surfaces, to recognize significance where others might dismiss it. There is also strength in vulnerability. The child did not shield herself with irony or detachment. She spoke plainly, without anticipating reaction or consequence. Vulnerability often carries risk, especially in environments where control is valued. Yet it can also disarm defenses. When someone is open without agenda, it becomes difficult to respond with hostility or dismissal. The response of the adults revealed another layer of redefined strength. They did not assert authority or re-establish hierarchy. They did not correct or deflect. They allowed the moment to stand. This restraint required confidence. It takes strength to pause rather than dominate, to listen rather than instruct. In that pause, respect replaced control. Redefining strength also involves acknowledging impact rather than intent. The child did not intend to challenge or reveal anything. Her impact, however, was undeniable. Strength, in this sense, is measured by effect rather than force. The ability to change the emotional or psychological landscape of a room is a form of power that often goes unrecognized because it does not fit traditional metrics. This moment also highlighted strength as continuity. The values embodied by the adults had been transmitted effectively enough to be reflected back by a child. That reflection demonstrated endurance beyond individual action. Strength was no longer confined to those in uniform. It existed in the next generation, already forming its own understanding of courage and responsibility. In redefining strength, the focus shifts from conquest to connection. The child's voice connected worlds that were usually kept separate. It bridged professional identity and personal life. That bridge required no force, only honesty. Connection, when it reveals truth, can be stronger than separation built on secrecy. Strength in this context also includes the ability to be seen, to allow one's identity to exist beyond carefully controlled spaces. The recognition forced the adults to confront how their actions and identities extend into the lives of others. Accepting that visibility without retreating into defensiveness is a form of courage. This redefinition challenges long-held assumptions. It suggests that strength is not always about standing firm, but sometimes about standing still. Not about speaking louder, but about listening more closely. Not about shielding others from reality, but about trusting them with pieces of it when they are ready. By recognizing strength in a child's voice, the moment expanded the meaning of the word. It acknowledged that resilience, awareness, and honesty can exist without rank or experience. It showed that strength can be quiet, unexpected, and deeply human, capable of reshaping understanding simply by being present and true.